So it's been my privilege this last year to wear the hat and to be at as many events as I possibly could, and yes, with the hat, with my ukulele, with my kids and family, and y'all are like family to me. So it's been a privilege, and I now will pass the hat to your new Commodore, Kathy Sheehan.
Oh boy!
Wear it with pride. You wear it well. Fair winds and following seas, and you will also be the new keeper of the files.
Oh, the files! Oh boy!
It's been living in my closet for a year. I'm thankful I get to have the space back.
All right. Well, thank you. I will wear this proudly. I think I'm gonna have to. It's big head to fill.
Well, yeah. It's a lot of hair. It's a lot of hair.
All right. That's it. Anything else? Thank you.
So, for those of you who don't know us, and I see a lot of familiar face here, Karen and I have been members of Corinthian Yacht Club since 1992. We have an Islander 36 sailboat named Islander that's at Gate 9, and we've been sailing the Salish Sea, Vancouver Island, Desolation Sound for 25 years on that boat. So we're kind of fixtures. Anyway, in 2021, right in the middle of COVID, we were celebrating our 50th wedding anniversary, and since we like to travel, we were trying to figure out where we could go. But we knew we didn't really, well, we had COVID concerns. We knew we didn't want to take our boat on an extended trip right at that time, but we were looking at Alaska. We thought, oh, Alaska would be a great place. It's somewhere we haven't visited. And we got to trying to figure out what our options were. And we looked at things like the Love Boat with 3,000 people on it and said, no, we don't want to go that way. And we stumbled across a boat here in Bellingham, actually. It's called the David B. It was built in 1929. It's been fully restored, and they run week-long charters out of Juneau, the Juneau area. And we booked passage on that in May of 2022 and spent 8 days on it. And then we decided, since we're seeing Southeast Alaska, we also wanted to get a taste of the interior. So when we were done with that, we hopped on a plane from Petersburg and flew up to Anchorage, where we met up with Mark Chains. Many of you may know Mark Chains from, he was a CYC member probably 6-7 years ago. He started out to go around Vancouver Island with me in his boat and got a call to go work in Anchorage, and he's been up there. And he and his wife connected us with a lot of things around Anchorage, up to Denali and out to the Kenai Peninsula. So that's the second part of our presentation tonight. And the third part, which is the blue part in here, while we were on the David B, I was joking with them about if they ever needed crew, let me know. Before I left, they said, well, how would you like to come back and do an 8-day trip as crew in Glacier Bay? And so I said, yeah. And Karen said, yeah, get out of my hair. And sent me on the way. So that's to be the third part of the presentation.
Okay. So as Mike said, we flew from Bellingham to Juneau because we were going to be going on the David B from Juneau to Petersburg. And we met up with a dear friend of Mary and Deb, Bill Hansen, who was so gracious, he and his wife. We'd never met them before. He picked us up at the hotel in his car. He's a naturalist, and he took us on a hike to go up and see the Mendenhall Glacier. And that was my first experience ever seeing a glacier. And at that time he explained to us how years ago when he started out in Juneau, it was way up to where this cliff was, and now it's receded all this way. So that was the first time that I had seen anything like that. We had dinner with them, and we also had time to go to the Alaska State Museum in Juneau, which we would highly recommend. A lot of history, not too much else with all the tourist traps that they have and things like that. So,
couple of things. His wife is Kate Troll, and if you know the Troll name from t-shirts in Alaska. If you're at been a loving fishery, you've seen the last one. Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. That's her brother that does that, and she was a great person too. But one thing I wanted to say about the Mendenhall Glacier is not a tidewater glacier. It does not empty directly into the ocean. It's a lake formed in front of it by ancient moraine that at one time it did go all that down to the water, but it pushed enough silt down there that as it retreated, it created this great big lake up there, and that's where we were.
So the next day we left to get on the David B, which we had toured here in the harbor. They have tours in April or so, usually every year, that you can go out and see what it's like. Walked down the dock and it was parked right next to one of the 5 big cruise ships that were in Juneau that had just arrived. And we got on and we're so happy this was going to be our little home for a week. Back one. Yeah, so we went inside. And this is the interior stern where the 8 guests ate all of our meals. And it was right next to the galley where Christine was a marvelous cook on her wood stove that she kept stoked with wood all night. From here, you would walk on toward the front of the boat, and this was what Jeffrey called the saloon area, where we could gather with the other guests and just relax. We go downstairs here, and down below was where each of us had our separate cabins. And you go up into the pilot house area, and we're more than welcome to come and sit anytime we wanted to on those seats up there too. This is Christine, part of the crew.
Kind of a cute one. Jeffrey kept calling it the saloon. I always thought of it as a salon. And I said, and Jeffrey, he started out on schooners on the East Coast, and he said, no. The salon is where you get your hair cut. The saloon is where you drink.
So this was our cabin, and this was a Pullman bunk that we had a little step that we could step up to, which was like queen size. Down below was where we could store our suitcases that we had brought. So we kind of kept everything in our bags when we weren't wearing it. Everyone had their own little sink, and then right here, my coat is hanging on the door that you would go through to go to our own private toilet and bidet. And at the end of the hall, because there were 4. There were 4 cabins. 3 have the doubles, and 1 had a twin setup. The end of the hall was the tub and shower that we shared with everyone else. And it just worked like magic. You could go anytime you wanted to take a shower. They had plenty of water to use.
When you were crew, did you have the same cabin?
No. Let's save questions till the end, and I can come back to individual slides and address things. Karen, bless herself, says we have to get this done in a half an hour.
You go too? Yeah. Yeah, so I'm sitting on the outer stern of the boat, and down below were the rubber boots. They provided rubber boots for each one of us. We sent them our shoe size. So when we went ashore, all we had to do was put on their boots, and we didn't have to haul them in our suitcases. Here's the group eating breakfast. We'd wake up in the morning, and Christine would have some good pastries out, and then they'd say, okay, breakfast is going to be in an hour. We'd have a wonderful breakfast, and they'd tell us what was available for us that day to do. In the evening, in the morning people gathered here, and in the evening, every evening, they had a little happy hour with tons of wine and the hors d'oeuvres and things like that, and we could go up and steer with Jeffrey too anytime we wanted to. Anything else? Okay. Okay, you tell them about this.
So this is the engine room. You can't hear the sound; it's not loud enough. But it's chung 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 chung, and you pretty much hear it in the engine room, but you can feel it all through the whole boat. That engine is the size of my car, basically. It's about 6 feet tall and about 10 feet long. It's 100 horsepower, and it's 3 cylinders. It's the original engine of the boat. Washington Metalworks, I think, is that. You can see his workshop down here that he has in the engine room. It's amazing to be able to, you know, I can't hardly get into my engine, but you could walk up and walk around there. He has a full toolbox. On the other side was the generator up there and oil. You'll notice 2 oil cans sitting up there. All of these push rods, the valves, the moving parts had to be oiled every hour. Not an automatic oiler in there. You had to. So that, when I crewed, that was one of the things I got to go down and do. Automatic. Yeah.
This was just a sample of some of our meals.
Yeah. Christine's a gourmet cook, and we never wanted for things. The last morning, she had all these croissants made. We left Juneau, and we went down the canal here and into Stevens Passage. The first stop, well, this isn't a really good one. The first one is at Taku Harbor, and that's where we are here. David B would anchor out in about 90 feet of water. It had he put out about it was 60 feet of water. He put out about 90 to 120 feet of chain. He called them shots. A shot is 90 feet. And he had, so with the chain and the anchor out, he had 4,000 pounds basically down on the bottom. But we'd go on shore excursions, and it was an option. You didn't have to go, but most people did. He would lower this dinghy down over from the side. It's basically a big aluminum john boat. It would hold 10 of us, and he'd take us into the beach. Taku Harbor was where an old cannery had burned down a few years back and was deteriorating. It was just a great opportunity for a photo shoot. Lots of pretty neat wildflowers around there. Taku Harbor to Woodsmith. This is Taku Harbor up here. This is Stevens Passage, and we came down here, and as we were coming along Stevens Pass, we would see humpback whales. We see a lot of fins and tails, and a lot of beautiful scenery along here. At this point, there was 15 eagles sitting on a variety of trees very close by. It was much like here in the Gulf Islands and up north in this town, but on steroids. It was just so much bigger and more huge and the like. We came on down here to the entrance to Endicott Arm and Endicott Arm and I'll come back to that. And we spent the first night here in Williams Cove, or we stopped for lunch down here at Wood Spit, and it was another shore excursion. We could get out and explore the shoreline. A lot of tide pooling and walking into the trees. Took us into the trees and just sat and listened to the quiet in there. It was amazing. As we walked over the spit, you could look up into, this is Endicott Arm and this is Tracy Arm. Endicott Arm goes up to a glacier. This Tracy Arm goes up to Sawyer Glacier. But you're looking back up here. This is one of the fords. This is the other fjord. These are the mountains. Snow is almost all the way down our whole trip, although in our almost 3 weeks that we were in Alaska, we had 1 day of rain. So we were pretty lucky. This is looking back up there. Williams Cove, we anchored in there for the night. It was a really, once again, deep anchorage. But what was beautiful about this, as you sat in here and you're looking out through the opening, what you would see is this look out here. And you think these are boats all out here, but these were icebergs floating by. And so we got to watch the progression of icebergs coming down Tracy Arm. And we did some crabbing, got some crabs. It was a really beautiful place. Humpback whale swam through there while we're sitting there. So going up Tracy Arm up to Sawyer Glacier was a lot like going up Princess Louisa. But once again, bigger. The big mountains around it, snow-capped, waterfalls along the way. And as we came up the arm, we had, there was ice in there, and Jeffrey he would maneuver the boat through there. Christine would stand up on the top deck and be telling him where he could steer. They had two-way radios that they would communicate with each other.
But what we loved is, too, we would never see any other boats, really. Every once in a while, we would see another small cruise boat, but it was somebody that Jeffrey had been talking about. All the small ships, the 65-foot that they were, would be in cahoots with each other, and they'd talk and say, hey, we're over here. Why don't you come over here? Or maybe you could come later. So we really didn't see any other boats. And we'd see the big cruise ships every once in a while cross way in the distance, and some of them would send in a little boat with a few passengers on it, but it was pretty secluded and private, we thought, so it was nice.
So this is going up Tracy Arm, and as I said, it was a lot like going up Princess Louisa. We encountered the ice, and Jeffrey managed to move through it. This is Sawyer Glacier, and it was our first view of a tidewater glacier, a glacier that calves right directly into the saltwater. We got up pretty close to it. We saw some small bergs calving off, nothing too big, but it was really interesting. Very cold there. It's like automatic air conditioning. The wind would blow off the glacier, off of the ice, and it was actually quite cold. So as we came back down, we're coming back down Sawyer Glacier. Once again, we're maneuvering through the ice. The hull on the boat is I think below the water line's 5 inches thick, above the water line is 3 inches thick. So he wasn't too worried about hitting this small ice. One thing about ice is 2/3 of it is below the water, so and you don't know what it looks like underneath there. And he was concerned about the prop hitting it. We stopped and picked up some chunks of ice to use we had them in our drinks that night with some whiskey over them. And what they told us was, don't chomp down on that ice. It's 1,000 years old and it's very hard. It could break your tooth. And so if you think about that hitting a prop, it would be a disaster. We came back down and we stayed in No Name Cove, and that was actually the name of the cove. It was really pretty cool. That was we saw a black bear and some mountain goats on the way up Sawyer, up by Sawyer Glacier, but this was the first place we saw a grizzly walking on the beach, and actually we were kayaking right there and could kind of kayak up fairly close to the bear, an adrenaline rush. We left from No Name Harbor that morning and we came down around over to Admiralty Island and Pleasant Bay here. Pleasant Bay actually is kind of an old anchorage. I think Vancouver was recorded in there, and John Muir spent some time in there when he was exploring around there. But most importantly, most fun, we took a skiff ride up the creek up there. We saw mink and eagles and the like. So that was Pleasant Bay on Admiralty Island.
So this was a highlight on Admiralty Island, was a Pack Creek bear viewing. And this was one of the things that they kind of advertise. They have the different tours on the David B, and some are photographic tours. This was a Pack Creek bear viewing tour. So,
So hold on a second. From Windfall Harbor, from Pleasant Bay, we came up and anchored in Windfall Harbor. We came further up the island to get to this point.
so in order to go on land on Admiralty Island there at Pack Creek, you have to have a permit. So they had applied for the permit, and they had contracted with a couple of guides that flew in from Juneau, and then they came over to the boat, and they were the ones that could get off onto the island with us because it's a very protected area. The bears are kind of tame, I guess.
Yeah, they're
almost.
acclimated to
They're
humans. It's
acclimated
been
to
a
humans.
preserve for about 30 years.
And so the guides told us how to act. We would get off of the boat onto the land. We would all stay together in a group, and we had to walk along like this, very, very low, be very quiet, even though we hadn't even really seen them except in a distance. And so then we sat on the top of this big berm and watched the bears come out from the hills down to clam and dig things up. And we watched them for a long time. We kind of got a little bit closer and a little closer. And then all of a sudden the bears started retreating a little bit. And so the guide said, okay, now we're gonna go up into this meadow. So we went up into this meadow and sat on a little hill right about here. We were very close to these bears. And the mama bear and the two cubs just came walking up. They were in the grass, and they were probably where Stu is compared to where I am, that far away from us. Just, they could care less that we were there. People were clicking with their cameras, and we watched them and watched them.
The guy told us, no matter how much your adrenaline gets going, you don't say anything, you don't move, you can take all the pictures you want, but you sit still. And this picture right here was shot with this is a full frame on an iPhone without zooming. We measured his footprint later on, he was 18 feet away from us. The two cubs got to playing like King of the Mountain on that log over there, so we were watching them wrestle around and like.
And then pretty soon they took off and they started leaving, and he said, well, I think it's about time for us to go back to the boat. So we started going down, and sure enough, the bears had walked around, and they were between us and where the David B was. So we had to wait there for a little while longer before we could go back to the boat. But this is very exciting. We felt good that they were so protected.
So the next morning, we stayed anchored there in Windfall Harbor, and the next morning we went back ashore and sat and watched them do more clamming. It was really interesting. They would dig in there and they'd find a big horse clam and they'd sit there and they looked like they were doing CPR to this clam, the way they would jump on it till they broke it open and ate it. And then we came back, and about noon we had lunch and we took off for Glacier Bay, which is at the south end of Admiralty Island. And we want to show you this picture. Christine and Jeffrey had the most amazing teamwork relationship that I've ever seen. Besides being amazing guests, but Christine here is weighing the anchor. She's lifting it up, but she's not hoisting it herself by walking around. That's the clutch on this old windlass, and this is the original windlass from the boat too. And they would, without even having to communicate, they would get through this old anchoring drill and the like. And believe it or not, he never backed down on the anchor. He just put all his weight down there, and we never moved.
Because we never traveled at night either. It was always during the day.
And how long were most of our trips?
About 4 hours. We travel about 4 hours a day. One long day, I think, was 6.
Yeah. And I think one of the concerns that we had before we went up there was, what's it going to be like when we get in rough water? Well, you're the inside passage. And rough water on the inside passage is about a 2-foot wave. And in a 100-ton boat, you don't feel it too much. So the next day we left from Glacier Bay on the south end, southeast corner of Admiralty Island. We came back across to the mainland, and we were headed in here to Scenery Cove. But as we came in, and once again we had to go over a bar, the current from all of these fjords flows over those bars at about 5 knots when it's maximum flowing. And it's shallow. It might be 12 feet deep, so he would have to and he would have to figure out the timing to go over there. As we came in here, right about this point, there was another small cruise ship, a little bit bigger than ours, and all these little boats know each other up there. And the skipper from the other boat called up Jeffrey and he said, "Hey, we're observing a nice large pod of orcas over here. Would you like to come on over and join us?" So we went over. This is their skiff from their boat, and we had orcas literally, I don't know, from here to Kathy and back of the room. And we watched them just swimming around, feeding, playing for about a half an hour before we came up here and anchored. Well, we stopped a little ways up here in a cove and took a hike up a hill to this waterfall. And even though we've all got jackets and hoods on, it wasn't raining, it was just cold. And that's, Alaska. Beautiful waterfall up here. From there we went up and anchored in Scenery Cove so that we would be able to dinghy into, there we go, into Baird's Glacier. Would you like to talk about this guy?
You did it.
Okay. Baird's Glacier is back over here. It's basically another tidewater glacier because it empties into salt water. But because of the moraine and the little channel that's in front of it, you can't get the boats right up to it. But we would take the skiff and he would run up in the ice. He let us out to walk on the moraine, which was just, it was like desert on one of these moraines, except there would just be beautiful little plants growing here and there. We got back in the skiff and he took us on a motor tour in between these icebergs. And these icebergs are taller than this roof, and we're just kind of cruising around underneath them. And the beautiful colors and shapes that were there. That was Baird's Glacier. That was the second saltwater glacier that we got to see. From Scenery Cove, our last day, we go out back over the bar again, and we're headed down to Petersburg. That's the town of Petersburg. It's got a medium-sized cruise ship anchored off at the end of it.
So it's just a little village, really, with a lot of fishing boats. And we got off the David B. and went to our hotel that we'd had the arrangements for. Mike and I hiked in the muskeg bog. We wondered, what are we going to do? And somebody said, why don't you hike up there? It was very interesting.
You go up to the top of the mountain, and there's this swamp at the top of the mountain. That's the muskeg.
And then there was a great bookstore that we discovered at the very end. We didn't have hardly any time left in Petersburg. I'd really recommend, if anybody's there ever, to go visit it. It's a little gift shop and a bookstore.
Petersburg actually has some connection to Bellingham, in that I think I see seafood. One of the seafood places that we have right here is a packer, has a packing plant there, and a lot of the boats, the big commercial boats, had Bellingham on the back of them. So there's a really a camaraderie, but it really was a village. There wasn't a whole lot there. What would you call it, Mike Jacobson? They're Norsemen. They were Danes. It had a Scandinavian feel, but more the Danish, Dutch, Norwegians.
Norwegian, Scandinavian.
Yeah. Okay. We stayed in a hotel. It was like a Swiss chalet. It was probably the nicest hotel we stayed in the whole trip. But anyway.
Next one.
So that's Petersburg. We were there one night, and like Karen said, we walked around. From Petersburg, we went to the Petersburg airport, and you're looking at the whole terminal right there in that one upper left-hand picture. It made Bellingham look like a true international airport. Alaska is the only one that flies commercially in and out of there, and they fly jets in and out. So we hopped on a jet there and flew up to Anchorage, where once again we met Mark Chains and his wife, and they had set out some plans for us. We rented a car, and we drove up here to Talkeetna, which is a little town, and that was our base for about 3 nights, because there's really not much up here, and that was we wanted to see the interior of Alaska and what it looked like. So we then drove into Denali. We were here for 3 nights, and then we came back down, drove from Talkeetna all the way down to Seward and the Kenai Fords National Park. This, outside of Anchorage, we hiked up on what they call Flat Top Mountain, and this is a panoramic view of Anchorage, literally sprawled probably across 20 miles. There's nothing really tall there, it's just all spread out. Karen?
And this was where we stayed right outside of Talkeetna, and it was a cute little town. And like Mike said, there wasn't many places to stay in Denali. We drove in a rental car, we drove into Denali, which took about 2 hours. This was the view of Denali from our bedroom window there, and we had heard that hardly anybody really sees Denali that goes up there. We were so lucky. And we ran into so many people that were in Denali visiting that said, where's the mountain? They couldn't even see it. So we stayed there. We were very lucky and hiked around a lot of trails around Talkeetna and saw a moose one day.
Yeah, we're walking on this trail, and Karen says moose, and we stop, and probably from here to Chris is this lady moose sitting there off the side, munching away, just kind of looking at us. So what do you do when you see a moose and it's that close? Because they're kind of scary. You jump behind a tree. So we jumped behind a tree and watched it for, 20 minutes, and then it went on its merry way.
So we did want to see Denali because that was one of the things we wanted to do. So we took the tourist bus tour, and we were very lucky because the guy that was driving the bus was one of the supreme drivers and told
Naturalists,
us, naturalists told us all about the animals. We saw a lot of animals there, but there had been a recent landslide, and the bus couldn't even go for as far as they usually do. So I don't know what it would be like if you do it when the road goes through all the way. So we were a little disappointed, but at least we had seen it from Talkeetna.
Yeah. Those are caribou over on the left, and moose above and below. A grizzly bear, the hind end of a grizzly bear. I guess he was telling us what he thought of us. And then a porcupine that had crossed the road in front of us. So there was a lot of wildlife there. Some beautiful views, big, just wide open scenery, and it was really pretty. I think that probably it was worth the trip, but I wouldn't go back.
And we met some people from Fairbanks in Talkeetna, and they said, you really saw the best of Alaska where you were on the boat trip.
So from Talkeetna, Denali and Talkeetna, we drove back down through Anchorage and out along, this is the Turnagain Arm right in here. This is actually two pictures put together to try and make it look like, I think it's 15 or 20 miles long. It's all of about 6 feet deep, and 20 feet deep, because it drains on the low tide and it fills back up on the high tide. And there's actually a tidal bore when the tide's coming back in. And on an extreme tide, when the moon and the sun are in opposition, it's a wave that they'll surf. They actually go out and have parties on surfing the wave all the way back up this channel. But a lot of quicksand out in there, so you don't get out and walk along there. This is the view of Seward and Resurrection Bay from our Airbnb that we stayed. It was another kind of nice little village town. This is the harbor down there, a lot of recreational power boats. I think fishing was really a big thing there. Not so much commercial fishing anymore. This is the picture here. This is the Seward Yacht Club.
But they were closed.
But they were closed. We couldn't get in. We wanted to go in and ask for reciprocity. But and while in Seward, we took a hike up to the Exit Glacier. The Exit Glacier is another one of those glaciers that doesn't dump directly into the salt water, but comes down. What would you say was the interesting part of walking back down from there?
Well, when we walked on the trail, they had markers. You know, in 1947, this was how far the ice went down, and this year it was just amazing to see how it retreated.
Yeah, in the 1900s, it probably retreated 2 or 3 miles up the canyon. It was pretty interesting.
So we really took that part of the trip. We really wanted to go to the Kenai Peninsula and the Northwestern Glacier on the boat tour, which was kind of like one of the whale watching boats that you see. Luckily, because of COVID, there were very few people on it. And so we'd made reservations to go out there and see the glaciers and see the wildlife, which we did, but we realized then that we had really seen almost all of that on the David B. on the trip that we had taken with them. But we saw puffin and we saw the whales and
Killer whales and humpbacks. A beautiful sea lion rookery here. It was actually a grotto with a beach back inside of it.
But it was interesting too because we weren't on the inside passage anymore. So we could see what it was really like out in the
Gulf
open
of
water,
Alaska.
even though it was a really calm day.
There were some nice
I was
rolling
happy.
swells out there, and it was interesting watching some of the people on the boat kind of get green gills and the like, but it was beautiful. We kind of had planned on this tour because we really didn't know what we were going to see in the line of glaciers when we were on the David B. And everybody had told us that the Northwest Glacier was really pretty nice, and it was beautiful. And if you were just going to Anchorage, I would definitely go out and see it. It was a beautiful, beautiful area. So from Seward, we drove back to Anchorage and we flew home. And so we were there 2.5 weeks basically up there in that. And as I said, when we were traveling on the David B, Karen and I, we got to joking with them about if they ever wanted crew, and they said, finally came back and said, yeah, Mike, how would you like to do the Glacier Bay tour in July? So I jumped on it, and on the Glacier Bay tour, which was a photography workshop, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. We left from Auk Bay, which is around the corner, but really part of Juneau, and we went out around, Covington Point and up into Glacier Bay, up the two arms there. And what I really interesting, I'd like to point out right here, can I use the pointer? In 1780, Vancouver came in here to explore, but he was kind of sickly, and he sent off Joseph Whidbey, whose Whidbey Island is named after, in a schooner to map the area. And Whidbey did a pretty nice job of mapping things. When he got to here, and this is 8 miles wide across here, he could only see 5 miles back into that cove because of the ice. So in 1790, all of the ice came down as far as here. A decade later, in 1890, John Muir, who decided he had been studying glaciers down in California. He wanted to come up to Alaska and see what the glaciers were like up there. And he hired some of the local First Nation people to paddle him in a kayak, and he kayaked from actually up in not Juneau, but one of the other towns up there. But they paddled down here. He was able to come up in a little ways up into this arm and see some of the glaciers. He could not get up in this arm. He established a campground right around in here and explored. And his namesake glacier, John Muir Glacier, is up in here, and it's no longer a saltwater glacier. So in 2022, all the ice, in basically a little over two centuries, the ice had retreated all the way back there. But it's interesting, it's not all of the glaciers are retreating. There's several of them that start high enough up in the mountains that are still getting enough snow up there that pack down the ice and push the glaciers down to the water. You can see some of my crew job, most of it was handling lines and fenders. I did get to drive a little bit. If you call it driving, it was always on autopilot. You were just standing up there watching for things. And my other job was to sit on the front of the boat, and when we got up close to the rocky shore, I had to jump off and keep the boat from hitting the rocks. So they put a 75, he had a lot of trust in me, putting a 75-year-old guy up there to do that. But the hey. When we rounded Point Coverton, which was down there at the south end, we came upon, from a distance out, we could see these humpback whales. 15 of them at a time would come up and they'd stick their heads up out of the water simultaneously, and then they'd go back down. 5-10 minutes later, you'd see them somewhere else. As we got closer and closer to them, this is kind of what it looked like. And what they're doing there is what's called bubble feeding or bubble netting. And if you're not familiar with it, they'll come up on a school of something like herring, and they'll swim around it blowing bubbles to compact the school of fish, and then they come up through the school with their mouths open, just gobbling everything up. Well, we sat there, maybe just sat there for about 45 minutes watching them, and we'd gotten pretty close to them, and they went down, and we didn't know where they were. And what do you know? They popped up right underneath the bow of the boat. Literally, that's the fluke on one of them right there. And it's happening so fast, we didn't know where they were. You couldn't get a picture of them coming out with their mouths open or anything, but you could see one swimming away. They were that close. Jeffrey and Christine said they'd never had an experience like that before, and we were probably one of few people that would ever see it that close. Inside of Glacier Bay, we visited while we were there 4 main glaciers: Lamplugh, Marjorie, Johns Hopkins, and McBride. And most of these were actually named by John Muir, colleagues and friends of his that were known. They were all tidewater glaciers. They all had these just beautiful different colors to them. Some of them were mostly just blue, and that's from the ice being compacted so much. Some of them were so full of the moraine that it was coming down with them, they had all these black streaks in them. But we got up pretty close to them. Most of them had a moraine in front of them where we could land. And that was what, I'll come back to that. As we were going up there, with all these glaciers, the water is so nutrient rich that there was all kinds of waterfowl there. I was really fortunate. I'd been looking for puffins the whole trip and really got close on this. This is a tufted puffin. This is a horned puffin. A redneck philanthrope. These are kittiwakes. And then the old oyster catcher. There were pitching guillemots and several kinds of gulls. There were a lot of birds up there. It was really pretty neat to see. And the mammals were really fun. The sea otters were actually, most of them let us get pretty close to them, and it was always like they were waving at us, floating there on their back, like, okay, you're welcome. We saw more humpback whales than I've ever seen in my lifetime, or probably will ever see. Sea lions, with big rookeries of sea lions, and these are harbor seals. Now, harbor seals would haul out on these ice floes in front of the glaciers. This is right in front of a glacier. And that's where they would give birth. And the naturalists say they do that there because the orcas won't come in there. Their sounding devices don't work well in that much ice and the like. So that was pretty cool. Almost every glacier had this right in front of them. Even the Sawyer Glacier that we saw down further down. John and Alan were the photographic instructors on the trip. Alan teaches at Whatcom Community College. John runs Adventures Northwest magazine. And they would tutor people on how to take pictures. Most of the people there wanted to take pictures of the ice, and I have to say it was magnificent. Ice was big, it was huge, and you could walk in between it. One of them caught me there just kind of meditating and reflecting. I found it more interesting to look at what was on the ground. These were oyster catcher eggs. Karen loves hearts, so when I saw that I couldn't resist it. And the flowers. Ice shapes were just, the icebergs that you see floating around had amazing sights to them. The scenery in Glacier Bay was just magnificent. It was huge. It was big and beautiful. Not many places to anchor in a small boat. And you can't go in a small boat and stay in there overnight. They'd only allow 2 cruise ships a day into Glacier Bay. And they have to be out by the end of the day. We were sitting in front of Marjorie Glacier, and this cruise ship came by. And this is one of these 15-story clear cruise ships, got 5,000 people on it. They've got a jumbotron up on the top deck. And you would sit there thinking, oh, well, they're looking at the glaciers on the jumbotron. No, they've had pictures of the Caribbean up there. There were a number of smaller boats. This is actually the National Geographic's exploration boat. It carries about 100 people on it. And there were several other boats up there. The Snow Goose does charters out of there. Catalyst out of Anacortes and Windward out of, I think, Port Townsend area were all in that area at the same time, carrying, the 10 to 15 passengers in there. But no big cruise ships. We did see one sailboat trying to sail in there. That was the only sailboat we saw the whole time. But it was beautiful, beautiful views. The water was amazing. It would turn from these bright blues into the turquoise. The clouds were always drifting around through. Finally, we left and came back to Ock Harbor. Ock Harbor is on the just slightly north of Juneau. It's another one of these harbors where there's a lot of recreational fishing, a lot of commercial fishermen, and there are a surprising number of sailboats. The typical fishing boat, typical small yacht with its own helicopter, and they're lined up there. Look at them all. I mean, that was great. And the David B. And that was pretty much the end of the trip. And that was our summer in Alaska. So Barbara asked what my cabin was like when I crewed. It was basically a closet with a single bed in it. It was half a closet. The bed stuck out around the corner. It was on the side of the boat, so the whole time when you got up to dress, you were kind of standing like this. But it was comfortable. It was very nice. Any other questions?
What kind of fuel did that engine have?
Diesel. Yeah.
Do you remember the make of it?
Washington Iron Works.
Oh,
Yeah.
What were the roads like in driving around to Denali and Talkeetna?
They were probably a lot like driving the roads in the San Juan Islands, mostly one lane in each direction, pretty well kept, but you could see how they had to work on it, that the ice and the snow in the winters. The saddest part about that trip is that so many of the Sitka spruce up there, which are these tall, narrow spruce, have been infected by a bark beetle, that they're all dying in black. And I would say 90% of the forest around Anchorage and Denali is gone because of that. It's still standing. If the idea of the David B interests you, they are here in Bellingham. As Karen said, that they do a tour in April. If you go to Northwest Navigation on the website, you can find more out about them. But you don't have to, because March, Christine and Jeffrey are going to do a presentation on the history of the boat and their restoration of it and the things that they do with it. Really interesting people. Jeffrey, he got his start on schooners in Maine. He's done tugboats, he's done tour cruises, he's done the Victoria Star that comes out of here and goes over there. Really knowledgeable guy. Christine's an amazing photographer and a naturalist and a cook. So yeah, March meeting should be really, really entertaining and good.
That was really great.
Well, thanks for your patience in getting set up.